Mr. President, isisithola yini uzokuthola nemishuwa?
Now Africa became a battlefield for Russia, United States, China.
Almost every plenary session had climate change on the topic.
There is a problem.
That is why we are saying it is time to reform the international financial institutions.
The agenda of the climate change, where does it come from?
Is this change of the pattern of the climate?
Is there really climate change?
You can respond in French, Mr. President.
I also know about the next pandemic, right? Because I'm a virologist.
Like they don't comment? Wow, man.
We have an AU summit, which I think, in my opinion, has literally become a talk shop. We just come, we talk. But do we really understand what we're talking?
Don't touch me. I'm an accredited journalist, you understand? Yeah. I'm not here because I jumped in. I'm accredited here. What are you talking about? What's the worst I can do? What's the worst that I can do here?
The AU Summit 2023, the 36th AU Summit in Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. I don't know whether I should say it was a success or, I don't know, something else. So when I came here, I really had the passion to ask the relevant questions that I feel are not even asked all the time. But is it not of concern to know that people like a Bill Gates work closely with the United Nations or the WHO, and he always knows about the next pandemic?
No, I also know about the next pandemic, right? Because I'm a virologist. I think in 2019, I gave a speech in Abuja, in Nigeria, at the African Society for Lab Medicine, and I said the last pandemic was 100 years ago. Really big pandemic in 1918. We are 100 years, and because of our own behavior, climate change, moving into new territories, the behaviors that our own behavior vis-a-vis movement will create an environment for a virus to emerge anywhere and become a threat very, very quickly anywhere. Viruses emerge all the time. There are about 217 viruses out there in the wild that are ready to jump into human beings. So we just have to be aware of that.
So we get here at the AU Summit, we go into the different plenary sessions, different AU commissioners, heads of states, all sorts of political delegations, perfectly represented from all different African countries right here at the African Union. So, the top questions I had was that, what next for Africa?
And that is why I am saying that trying to walk away from the financial systems that exist today is cowardly. I think we should confront these financial institutions because the globe is a shared resource. Africa is part of the world. We cannot have a world of our own at the corner. In any case, the emitters, the people who have brought us here, are the people who today control the World Bank, the IMF, and the other financial institutions. And if we walk away from them, then we allow them to walk scot-free. We must have this conversation and look them in the eye and tell them, you have put us here. Either we are getting out, all of us, or none of us is getting out.
Here is the point. Why did the African Union was absent? The African Union should, according to the Article 25th from the Charter of the Democracy and Election, to exert diplomatic efforts for mediation, not just to issue statements and to issue resolutions of sanctions. This is the case of Sudan. Before the military coup in Mali, there was French intervention, Russian intervention, terrorists, where there was a critical situation in the country, and there was a severe political crisis. So these things happening not because there are some people that they love and thirsty, they love the power and just want to take the power. Maybe the same person who is sitting on the desk issuing the decision, if he in that side, maybe he might take the same decision at that time. You don't know. You should go there. You should mediate. Also, African Union is an organ for development and plans. You know that now suspending 4 African nations now making problems within the workshop, the meetings of planning, because how you can plan for a road crossing a country and the country is absent. So what will happen now, those countries will be back, definitely, but after coming back, you will restart things that you have done. So I'm calling that there should be a solution, because this is Africa and this is the reality. You should make a compromise for that, not for full recognition for military cause, but not make African absent, because that will give the foreign intervention in Africa more power. Now Africa became a battlefield for Russia, United States, China, and look here, what happened in Ukraine. Ukraine lost their peace because they became a battlefield for Russia and Europe. They lost their country, they lost their peace because they want to join to NATO, and Russia don't want them to join NATO. Ask Ukrainian, is this a good situation to be a battlefield? So now Africa should not be a battlefield for global powers. We as African and we as the mother continent of the world, we should have our own story.
The readiness of Africa when it comes to the diseases, so they call it, diseases, viruses, which is why we have the Center for Diseases, right? Control here in Africa, over and above the one that we have in America, led by the deep state and all that. And then also, why are African leaders talking about climate change in everything? Almost every plenary session had climate change on the topic.
Our voice on matters to do with development, instability, conflict, how Africa is bearing the brunt of climate change, yet they have made the least contribution, cannot be something that can be swept under the carpet anymore. We were struggling in Sharm el-Sheikh to make the case about loss and damage, when loss and damage is a daily living experience in Africa. We have lost wildlife, we've lost livelihoods, we've lost diversity, and all this is evident, but we're still struggling to make the case, and that is why we are saying it is time to reform the international financial institutions so that they can respond to the current crisis. What we have in terms of climate change is not a problem. It is an existential crisis, and it must be treated as such.
But there were very interesting comments that we got from President Ruto, President Hakainde Hichilema. Is it something that African continents are considering, going out of the United Nations? Is it necessary for African continents to be still in the United Nations?
I don't think we should be talking about going out of the United Nations. We should be talking about Africa being central to decision-making in the UN system, not Cinderella position. That's why we should be part of the Security Council. Africa should be part of the Security Council. That's why Africa should have a seat at the G20. That's why Africa must be represented at a table where decisions are made. Otherwise, who talks for us?
I don't know. This is the 36th AU summit. You get to understand the leaders that we have. You also get to see the picture, the big picture of why we have to continue to pray for the nations of the world. That I honestly am beyond even convinced after coming to this meeting.
Who takes care of the interests of the voices in the remote rural areas of Africa if Africans cannot talk for them at the global table where key decisions are made? Decisions about where to invest, decisions about risk profiling, as I said earlier on. So I don't think it's a question of whether Africa should come out of the UN system. The UN system was based on keeping the world stable.
Number one, African Union should be independent in resources. Now, 60% of the program budget is coming outside from Africa, from the former colonial masters.
Just yesterday, in some of the sessions we had, some of the plenary sessions, I was asking the certain ministers and commissioners, AU commissioners, that why are we in an African summit, the 36th African summit for that matter, but are still relying on Western intervention? So How then do we meet as Africans to resolve African problems with African solutions?
They are manipulating Africa in a very cheap way. I remember very well the strong lady, Madame Zuma, when she was the chairperson of the African Union Commission. And before that, also to be fair, President Kagame, they adopted, when he was the president of the African Union, they adopted plans for the financial independence of the African Union.
We are happy to see, I'm extremely happy to see that Africa is also solving its own problems. And it is good that African leaders, they stand together to really accommodate African concerns and have like a vision for Africa. That's important for us because the relationship has not only been based on mutual interest, but also on values, on ethics, on liberty, on freedom.
When I came for this African Union Summit this year, my agenda was to try and get the right answers to the necessary questions, especially pertaining to the time that we all went into a lockdown during COVID-19. There were many questions that we asked that I feel to this very day have not been answered appropriately by our African leaders.
Climate change is in the agenda, climate change is in the vogue. I will just invite you to look at what is happening recently, just here in Turkey and Syria. What are the root causes of that earthquake that happened? You ask. I will come back to the question for Africa. The earthquake that is happening in Turkey and Syria. What are the consequences? What are the root causes? It came from what?
Hence, I will go back again to the issue of the climate change. So my colleague here says that, isn't it interesting that European countries are actually going back to coal and they're asking Africans not to use coal? I would like to think that raises an alarm. Definitely something is not right. My first question, though, was not answered fully when I said the agenda of the climate change, where does it come from?
So here in Africa, just to say those are the parameters, because climate change exists. Because when there is drought, there is not rain, is the change of the pattern of the climate, the variability of the weather variability. When they don't have, it's not running. And science is saying there is evidence that the global warming is coming, and we are looking at it. I will send you, go to Chad. You will see where is the river, Chad. Lake Chad is disappearing. Crocodiles are coming. Transhumancy is becoming there in Chad. Let me tell you what happened during I die in Mozambique, Malawi, and Zimbabwe. 11 years ago, there was another, I don't know if it's a Flora, I don't know how to put the name. That one you can even ask me, why do they put name? But it's science. No, let me just say, we are talking about the impact. We are living with this impact. So this lady, when we went to Sharm el-Sheikh, President Nyusi from Mozambique is the champion of disaster risk management. And he brought that girl. I think many of you, if maybe you were born, because nobody here is less than 11 or 16 years. This lady, she was running away from the floods and for the cyclone, and she was pregnant, she climbed a tree. But after she got so tired, she fell down. The baby was there. When the rescue were coming, they took this baby. This girl exists. She came to Sharm el-Sheikh last year. And President Nyusi said, look at one of the results. All of us, we have tears to see that girl.
So you then went on to say, Honorable, that we see the effects of climate change because of the hunger and the famine. That in its own is also questionable. Hunger and famine can be engineered. Is there really climate change? Maybe that's the question I should be asking. Because the people that have perpetrated this issue of climate change, it's coming from the Western countries, who they themselves cannot even answer the full questions when it comes to climate change. I'll give you an example. In a very interesting interview on CNN, the owner of the Weather Channel was asked about what climate change was and if it was a reality or a hoax. And he clearly stated that this was a hoax, that there is no such thing as climate change. I have asked several leaders in the Western countries that is climate change a reality or it's a hoax? And most of them agree, especially speaking to the people in the Netherlands. The farmers in the Netherlands have been kicked out. I'm just trying to give examples so that you could understand my question fully. And the truth of the matter is there really isn't data that supports that there is anything called climate change.
Climate change exists. Climate change impact exists. When you look at a sector like agriculture, when you look at here in the Horn of Africa, famine, because there is no water. There is no water scarcity, water stress on the continent. That is why we say we need to really address the same. We need to have programs. We need to change, this type of polluting the planet. When you go a town like some towns in Africa, you see the pollution, the air pollution is there. And this is bad against the public health. So there is a problem. We in agriculture, we are suffering. Animals are dying. If that's the question, animals are dying. Pastoralism, they're dying because of climate change, lack of water, lack of grazing. All this is existing. So now, this is an agenda we have to tackle.
In my findings as an investigative journalist, it looks like this issue of climate change is just being perpetrated by the globalists. So my question back to you, our honorable African leaders, then becomes, why are we so accepting to the ideologies of these people in the West? Why can't we question them? For example, it was so disappointing to find out that our own presidents could not even ask who isolated the virus for the COVID-19. The vaccines are killing people. It's undeniable. Both in Africa and world over, the evidence is so much that even Dr. Fauci himself cannot answer anything. But then we have an AU summit, which I think, in my opinion, has literally become a talk shop. We just come, we talk. But do we really understand what we're talking? So you speak about investigating and solutions. So if you're investigating, are these not the questions that you ask? How do you find solutions when we don't even understand what we're talking about in the first place?
So any problem, any shocks that come, you cannot be sober and look at it. So if you don't believe in it, just look at what is happening. Even in South Africa recently, this, how do you call it, KwaZulu-Natal. And it was our situation room here that alerted them there. Because we have an instrument now to predict and inform that. Be careful, you can save life, you remove people from that area.
I really would love clarity on those issues. Who advises? How do you ascertain? How do you then come to the conclusion that this is a challenge for Africa? Africa was never really affected by COVID-19. I don't even think this whole climate change hoax even affects us. First and foremost, it was global warming. It went to global cooling. Now it's climate change. Just to show you the lies. So when you keep asking questions, they change the name again. They did the same thing with COVID. They kept on changing definitions of words because we kept asking questions. To this very day, we don't have answers.
If you want, the coordinator of IKEA is going to go with him there. He will show you how many people. You talked about statistics. Everything is there. Go to our situation room and you believe that things is happening.
Do African leaders actually see climate change as a reality? If so, based on what? What are the stats? What's the data? What's the simulation? Who proved what?
Because over-reliance on other areas, other continents has left Africa vulnerable. Look at what happened during the height of the COVID pandemic. First, COVID vaccines were going to who? To those who produced them, isn't it? Africa had to stay in the queue. In the process, we lost lives. So it is important that the supply chains arising from our production capacity of goods and services improves, and so we don't have to overburden other continents to provide for Africa.
Is Africa fully looking inward in terms of getting medicines for its people? For example, we've got universities that can actually do the research and come up with medicines for us, be it vaccines or whatever it is that we need. Are we saying that Africa at this point in time is completely free from Western influences? For example, Gavi, which is heavily sponsored by Bill Gates,
or maybe like a Klaus Schwab or something like that. In my opinion, I believe they're eugenicists, and I don't see how eugenicists would want us to be well when their agenda is eugenics. So is Africa actually fully free from the influence of those people? Are we fully looking inward in terms of manufacturing vaccines that are suitable for Africans? Thank you.
Another highlight of this was the fact that we had a Libyan delegation that came to the AU summit. Some other countries were suspended. We have countries that were suspended from the AU summit, Sudan being one of them for various reasons. Apparently, they broke the protocol of the constitution of the AU summit, so they were not a part of it. But we had a Libyan delegation, and I got the opportunity to speak to a representative of the Libyan presidential council.
That's why now Libyans are expecting better from Africans. We have a lot of similarities in conflicts, in post-conflicts. Many countries in Africa have been through, post-colonial history and conflicts and similarities. And I like what has been said now in the opening, one of the opening speeches in this session of African Union, that Africa needs their own narratives and their own solutions. And that's time. I totally agree that it's now almost over a decade since the conflict started in Libya, but yet there's still a chance and opportunity to be invested in these resources that we have and good relations and trust, because we know that Africa wouldn't have greeds in Libya as some other Western power, but Libya are complementing relations and other states.
It would be an honorable thing if our African leaders can give us proper answers, because Africa right now is the game changer in the world. So if we don't realize it, then it's like we're being recolonized again.
Have just 5 hotels. They can make money for the program budget. So you don't need the Western countries. Not necessary to close the door, but after that, the African programs of planning and infrastructure that will come from African Union financial independent resources. And we know that here a conflict of interest is happening clearly.
Everybody was talking about the climate change issue. Even if we're talking about kids, even if we're talking about children, how to alleviate poverty, how to eradicate children not having education, everything was all about climate change. So I wondered,
Mr. President, do you believe that climate change is a reality or it's a hoax by the Western agenda, the globalist, push towards the new world order?
If we weren't living the effects of climate change, maybe I would say it's a hoax. But in Kenya, this is the 5th consecutive year without rain. For the first time, we have lost 200 elephants. We have lost 2.5 million heads of livestock. We have the worst drought in 40 years. This can possibly not be a hoax. This is an existential threat. This is a reality. And that is why we are saying there need to be an open, candid, forthright conversation on the new international financial ecosystem that responds to the crisis that the global south, the continent of Africa, among others, are living every day.
I really wondered why we had all African leaders talking about climate change. And therefore, I had to ask the relevant questions. I need not to tell you much, but you have to have a listen for yourself. And let me know, were these answers the answers we were expecting? And based on the answers that were received, then what does it mean?
Sorry, sir, can you just answer one of my questions? Just one of my questions.
Where are you from?
I am from LN24 South Africa, in Johannesburg. I want to find out, the United Nations, how exactly does it support Africa when it comes to food?
Yes, we didn't cover it. I'm so sorry. Sorry, it needs to be a request ahead of time. Colleagues, ask our colleagues. If it wasn't clear, there's very little I can do.
Here we go.
فخامة الرئيس تحدثت اليوم أرجوك يا فخامة الرئيس.
Mr. President, you said you will talk to us when you come back. We have. Oh, wow, wonderful. Mr. Why are you pushing us, you? Like, what is your problem? Why are you handling me? Why? No, don't touch me. I understand when you say move, but by the time you're touching me, then that's a problem. I'm only doing my job. Please don't do that again. Don't do that. Don't touch me. I'm an accredited journalist. You understand? Yeah. I'm not here because I jumped in. I'm accredited here. What are you talking about? What's the worst I can do? What's the worst that I can do here? Don't touch me. Talk to me, but don't touch me. It's my body, not yours. It can be so irritating sometimes. You know, I'm trying to do that. He's just pushing me like that. You think I don't know what I'm doing? Mr. President, is this today? Our name is sure. Vana venyu vari ku-Africa Union. Tofana kutaura nemi. Takamirira president vedu. Mr. President, greetings, sir. Not now, sir? Not even just a comment?
Not now.
Okay, tozo yarini.
Muzi yakutera kwedu. Kutera kwa ubitwa.
Kotsa kunenge kwa kure. Vamwe vari kungoti pa ma-comments vachipfuura vachifamba. Taitaura na president. Kungavunza kuti how's the African Union Summit? Kungati kwani mangu ma-presidents ese vanongopfuura vangoti pa just one comment.
Then what do you do with that comment of 54 heads of state?
We put it on TV. Huh? We put it on TV.
Were these answers the answers we were expecting? And based on the answers that were received, then what does it mean? What I really wanted to particularly find out was that, even if it was going to be off the record, unfortunately, I never got the chance to do that with any of the, either politicians or heads of states or the delegations that were here.
Unfortunately, we know that Africa is falling behind in the meeting the Malabo nutrition targets and the Sustainable Development Goals. According to the last joint report on the state of food security and nutrition in the world, led by FAO, 281 million people in Africa are undernourished. Nearly 60 million African children under 5 years of age suffer from stunting, and 14 million suffer from wasting.
But I still need to understand, is climate change a reality in Africa? Do African leaders actually see climate change as a reality? If so, based on what? What are the stats? What's the data? What's the simulation? Who proved what? Based on what number of factors would we have a whole African Union come to speak about climate change almost at every plenary session?
Furthermore, more than 1 billion people in Africa could not afford the health debt in 2020, and an increase of 25.4 million people from previous year. These challenges are being exacerbated by the impact of the climate crisis, conflict, the ongoing economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the war in Ukraine, which are rising levels of malnutrition and hunger.
Was to say that, is it because you really don't know the agenda behind the climate change, the agenda behind the mRNA vaccines, the agenda behind the so-called COVID-19 debacle? Like, do you not really understand that agenda?
COVID-19 was a pandemic, just as HIV is still a pandemic. And a pandemic means all people are affected almost at the same time. And we know that HIV/AIDS is a pandemic, it's still a pandemic. COVID was a pandemic that we knew it was going to come, but we just didn't know how soon it was going to come. And we also acknowledge that we are in an era of pandemics.
A few ministers here and there, AU chairpersons and commissioners. Very interesting comments that we got, disturbing comments as well for me with some people.
Mr. President, are we going to see a vaccine coming up from Madagascar again? We know you had formulated one good one before. Are we expecting anything? Wow.
Wow. Do you believe that COVID-19 was a pandemic or a plandemic?
COVID-19 was a pandemic, just as HIV is still a pandemic. And a pandemic means all people are affected almost at the same time. And we know that HIV/AIDS is a pandemic, it's still a pandemic. COVID was a pandemic that we knew it was going to come, but we just didn't know how soon it was going to come. And we also acknowledge that we are in an era of pandemics. WHO in 2022 declared 3 public health emergencies of international concern: the monkeypox, Ebola, and COVID-19. That is a signal that something big in future may come, which means we must prepare today for the future.
Where do viruses come from, sir?
All viruses come from animals. So 70% of our infections do come from animals. So in other words, if we maintain that barrier between animals and human beings, you will not get viruses, will not emerge.
Or is it because you're just purely ignorant? But I really could not get that.
So viruses are not man-made in labs like we are seeing with the gain of function, Dr. Fauci, the COVID-19?
No, the viruses are not. I mean, I'm a virologist. I can tell you that viruses are not man-made. Viruses are very highly adaptable.
Vaccines that were mandated on people when it came to like maybe COVID-19, we're even seeing some vaccines right now for HIV, a lot of vaccines just coming up. Are they really vaccines or is mRNA technology?
No, they are really vaccines. And that science has given us the possibility to use mRNA to produce vaccines quickly. So I think we should just be grateful that that technology, the mRNA, enabled us to produce a vaccine, run it through clinical trials, and make it available within 1 year. It has never happened in the history of infectious diseases for once.
But it also goes down in history that this vaccine came around too quickly. Isn't that highly...
Science. I mean, no, it's not questionable because you just can't question science. I think there's a lot of science evidence behind the vaccines. They go through rigorous 3-phase trials. They go through phase 1, which is for safety, phase 2, which is for safety and efficacy, and phase 3, which is large scale, to see if they're actually producing the intended effects in people.
What I really wanted to particularly find out was that, even if it was going to be off the record, unfortunately, I never got the chance to do that with any of the, either politicians or heads of states or the delegations that were here, was to say that, is it because you really don't know the agenda behind the climate change, the agenda behind the mRNA vaccines, the agenda behind the so-called COVID-19 debacle? Like, do you not really understand that agenda?
I've received Moderna, I've received Pfizer, I've received 4 doses of Pfizer, 1 dose of Moderna.
Is that not placebo? Is that a real mRNA?
Real mRNA vaccine. I just received, just 2 months ago, the bivalent vaccine, which is adapted to the Omicron virus, which was produced, which was identified in your country. So anything that we put in our body have a minimum risk. The question is always, does the risk outweigh the benefit, or does the benefit outweigh the risk?
We can only but wait to see. A few months, just a few months, I believe we will know which nation has what agenda. Remember, I say to you, we had a heavy presence of Western powers here. The globalists, the eugenicists, the New World Order people were here too. They were here because of their interest in Africa. So I think if we to really follow the story through for the rest of this year, we would understand which country is aligning to which camp. And then maybe it'll be easy to ascertain where Africa stands right now. But having said all that, it is so beautiful to see, though, the African spirit of African people coming together with so much pride to discuss African business, to discuss African business for the African people. For the African people. God bless Africa.